Hello everybody. I mentioned at one point that I might pickle some beets, and when I did that I had a couple of people ask me to please make a video because I guess they hadn't pickled beets before. It's a fairly simple process, and I'm just getting started. The unpeeled beets, I've cleaned them up as much as possible, washed them and removed the ends where the greens were and nipped off most of the roots and whatever. But you don't peel them at this point. You cook them first, and they should be cooked until what the recipe calls fork tender. You don't want to cook them until they are, soft and mushy. You want some texture left in them, but they will be cooking for more than a half hour once they start to boil. Beets take quite a while to cook, and then they'll have to be thoroughly cooled before you can peel them. So I'll put together the pickling liquid now, although I won't cook it yet. I won't boil the pickling liquid until I have the beets cut up and in the jars and ready to use it, but I'll put it together now and show you what's in it. In that saucepan are 2 cups of water, 2 cups of white vinegar. You could also use cider vinegar. I have in the past, but this recipe talks about using white, and white's what I happen to have had in the house. I also, this is a recipe that I found online, so I will put a link below this video to the recipe. 1 teaspoon of allspice, powdered allspice, which is floating in one clump. 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. 1 teaspoon of ground cloves, and 1 teaspoon, if I can get a teaspoon, of whole cloves. Now that gets brought to a boil and then simmered for 10 or 15 minutes or so before you use it. But as I say, I won't be boiling it for some time yet until I have the beets ready to go. Now I'm going to wash my jars, and I sterilize mine by putting them in the oven after they've been washed and rinsed. My oven, I guess I could bring it on at a lower temperature, but it normally heats up to 350. Once it's heated to 350, I just shut the oven off and let them cool in there. Well, it took over an hour to cook them. And now I just put them in cold water. Just run cold water. To peel them is very easy. You just slip the skins off with your hands like that. You end up with red fingers. But they peel very easily. Before I put them in jars, if there's anything that needs to be trimmed off, I will. Like there's a little root left on the end there. Maybe I'll trim that bit of stem end on, but I'll be slicing them up anyway before they go in the jars. So take care of that part at that point, I guess. And I'll bring you back when it's time to put them in the jars. Well, I have the pickling liquid on, and when it comes to a boil, I'll simmer it for 10 minutes. I've got a canner on the stove, bringing the water in it to boil, and my jars have already been sterilized, and the rings, the lids, the part with the rubber seal, I have those in a saucepan on the stove. They don't really have to be so much sterilized as they will seal better if the rubber is hot. So I just bring those to a simmer, I guess. I don't think I've mentioned what the recipe calls for the amount of beets. It says 35 to 40 small beets. So I always find that a silly thing to say. You're canning beets out of your garden, you'll can whatever you've got, I guess. Or if you buy beets, I suppose you could count, but I don't worry about that. This one appears to be a bit on the woody side. I'm going to let it grow a little too long, I guess. I'll pickle it anyway and see what it's like. I make the amount of pickling liquid that it calls for, and if I need more, I make more. If I didn't need as much, I have some left over. The idea of counting how many beets you're doing and doing it that accurately, to me, is silly. I will bring you back once I have these all sliced up and in the jars and ready to put the pickling liquid on them. Well, I had enough to fill 4 750 milliliter jars. I guess that's roughly 3 liters if you multiply the 750 by 3. So probably close to 3 quarts or 5 to 6 pints or something of beets, and I think maybe I've got enough of the pickling liquid to cover them, leaving about 3/4 of an inch at the top for hid space in each one. I'll tighten that up a bit more before it goes in the canner. The kitchen smells wonderful. A lovely spicy mixture that's been simmering away there for 10 to 15 minutes. Well, I won't make you watch me do all of this pouring. I'll bring you back when it's time to put them in the hot water bath. I had plenty of the pickling liquid, even had some left over. Once this returns to the boil, it'll be boiled for 12 minutes. Usually takes a fair amount of time for it to come back to the boil. It has to heat up the jars and the contents, I guess, before it starts boiling again. But 12 minutes in the hot water bath, and then they're set aside to seal and cool down. Well, they've had their 12 minutes in the hot water bath. Now to wait to hear them click and seal. I'm sure they will. There was a good head space on each one of them, so when it expels a lot of that air when it's in the hot water bath, so when it cools down it hauls the cover down tight. Well, I hope that was helpful to the people who wanted to know how I pickle beets. Thank you very much for watching.